Folks, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Film geeks shall inherit the earth. And today's film, yet again, reiterates that point. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, today, I've got a great episode for you. Shortcomings, which is in theaters right now, so mask up, go see it. And it is directed by Randall Park. Yes, you know him as a talented actor, but this is his feature film debut as a director. Now, I saw Shortcomings at Sundance and was a huge fan of the film. It really spoke to me. It's a fantastic adaptation of a graphic novel. No, there's no superheroes in it. It's about a film slacker. I just said that. But there's too many good things to say, and we're going to get into them today in today's podcast. So I highly recommend that you support independent film. Go out, see Shortcomings. It's in theaters now. Mask up, bring a friend. You'll have a lot of fun. And I want to thank Randall for being so generous with his time as our guest today, because he was very forthcoming about his creative process and what it took to get this film made. So I know you'll dig this episode. Now, of course, as you know, we are in the midst of a WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike, and there's rumors that the studio is coming back to the negotiating table this week even, but who knows where that's going to lead. And there's a lot of strike rules, and I just want everybody to know Randall reached out to SAG to make sure that he was able to do this interview along with the other interviews he was doing, and they said yes. They gave him permission because really this is a DGA director speaking today, and he is talking about his process for directing this film. So there are no strike conflicts whatsoever here. And Randall is a big supporter of SAG-AFTRA and of course WGA as well. And I actually met him in person for the first time this year at the WGA Awards earlier in the year. So you'll hear more about that later because yes, spoiler alert, Randall Park is also a screenwriter, but not on this movie. Now, folks, I would love to give a shout out to our sponsor today, Screencraft, who you can find over at screencraft.org. And firstly, Screencraft wants all WGA writers and SAG-AFTRA actors to know that they support both guilds in their historic strike for better working conditions and fair pay. Now, when it comes to breaking into Hollywood as a screenwriter, it can be a confusing, convoluted business. Fortunately, Screencraft helps writers with both the craft and the business of Hollywood. Screencraft.org has everything for your writing journey, ranging from interviews with your favorite writers like Tony Gilroy and J.J. Abrams to hands-on career coaching with their writer development team. Screencraft also has some of the best genre-specific screenwriting competitions featuring judges that include Oscar-winning screenwriters and literary reps. Hundreds of past winners and finalists have started their career with the direct support of Screencraft and have been connected to companies like Zero Gravity, Bellevue, APA, WME, and A24, and staffed on shows like The Flash, Woke, All Rise Up, Good Trouble, and more. So if you're an aspiring writer, don't wait to check out Screencraft over at screencraft.org. Now, right about here is where I would usually plug Backstory Magazine, my passion project, and I'll still give it a shout out. But, I just want to explain, we have been in pause mode as the entertainment industry is in pause mode. So, as I'm sure you've gathered, issue 50 has been delayed, and we are continuing to update great content into issue 49, which is our Oscar issue. So I know when you look at it, it seems strange because it's our Oscar issue and it still has an Oscar cover, and that was a long time ago. But actually, because we're a digital magazine, we keep updating issue 49 with new content, and it's new content that, it'll be in issue 50, but we really have other bigger plans for issue 50, and those plans just wouldn't work until writers are able to properly talk again about their works. So that's why issue 50 is in pause mode. But please, if you're a subscriber, open up issue 49. We're putting stuff on our site about it so people know. You could read free excerpts on our blog. We've done some really fun articles, and they're with animation writers because the animation writers actually can talk during the strike. That's okay. So there's a great Across the Spider-Verse article and more content that we keep updating as we get it. But yes, for a moment, it would be good to describe some of our content as kind of leaning into directors, cinematographers, and editors, because as actors and screenwriters, for the most part, are unavailable. Of course, Backstory Magazine fully supports the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike, and will be right here when the strike is over to continue providing the content that you all love. But in the meantime, you could go through our archive. Remember, we're a digital magazine. You could read our free issue on our website, backstory.net, or via our iPad app, Backstory. And we have 49 great issues of great articles for you to read with some of your favorite filmmakers, comic book artists, novelists, playwrights, and of course, TV writers as well, and actors, producers, and editors and cinematographers. So folks, don't sleep on Backstory. If you're aching for some in-depth craft content, it is right there waiting for you. And if you'd like to subscribe, we're happy to offer you a discount coupon code, which is SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. So look, it really means a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube channel, which we launched right when lockdown started, and you could see all the Zooms of these podcasts in. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project now in our 11th year. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with Randall Park on his directorial feature debut, Shortcomings. Randall, it's good to see you. How you doing, man?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast. So
well, that's awesome to have you. And thanks for listening. Like, so were you listening before you were produced?
I was listening. Yeah. Before I even directed TV, I was listening. I was just like loved listening to stories of how films got made. And this was a great source for me to gather a lot of information.
Well, I am honored to have you on the podcast. And this, by my count, and my count is not accurate, this would make you the 37th listener to go from being a listener and then eventually getting produced and being in the podcast. So
very nice.
37 is your number. 37
Good number.
Is your number.
Good number.
Pick up your order when we call 37. All right. Well, so Randall Park, who the hell are you? We're going to get into it. We know that you're an LA kid. You're born and raised here, grew up in Castle Heights. You went to UCLA. Right. Yeah. And you studied English with a focus on creative writing, which I love. The interesting part in the middle is you are a bit of a theater geek. You started a collective called Lapu the Coyote That Cares, which eventually became known as LCC. Tell us about your interest in theater and acting and how, while you were studying English and writing, how that kind of became a side passion for you.
Well, when I was at UCLA as an undergraduate, I got into creative writing through the major and did a lot of kind of short story writing and eventually got into playwriting. And me and a group of friends, 2 other friends, we wrote plays. And one day we were like, why don't we cast this, put these plays up? So we decided that my play would go first. I wrote this full-length play and we cast it and formed this Asian American theater company on campus. And that first play kind of set us off. And it's been almost 30 years since then, which is kind of crazy. But it was at that theater company where I first kind of started acting. I initially came in as a writer, but started acting there, fell in love with it, and directed, did kind of everything,
Had you had any experience with it in high school? Did you do any theater in high school?
No, I didn't. I made videos with friends, like one of our friends had back then the technology was really hard to come by, but we had
the High 8, right? In the 90s.
It was before High 8. This was before
really?
High 8. Yeah. I think our friend had a Betamax camera, I think.
Oh, okay.
Big cartridge in. And we used to, make shorts and skits and just silly comedy sketches and very early on. And then that was probably my first time ever dabbling in any form of recorded entertainment, but it wasn't anything I took seriously until college and that theater company.
And after college, you continued theater with another company called Propaganda, right?
That's right.
And so tell us about the outgrowth of that and what kind of projects you did there.
That was kind of an outgrowth of the college theater company. A lot of us who graduated, we still wanted to perform and write. And a good number of us were not, including myself at the time, were not looking to pursue a career in entertainment, but other things. But we still wanted to kind of hold on to that magic. So as a hobby, we would put on shows. And initially, we didn't have the money to rent out theaters. So we literally built a theater in the backyard of my parents' home where I still moved back to. We built it out of like scraps of wood that we'd find on the street. And we even built a bar, like a full bar.
Nice.
And because there were so many, we had built up so many fans at UCLA, we would pack the theater with folks and or the backyard with folks, and everyone would get drunk, and we put on these very debaucherous shows, and we did that for a few years, and until we, some of us started working, and we were able to afford to rent out some theater space, and we do runs of short plays and one acts, and we just kind of kept it going.
That's fantastic. Now, around this time, you were probably starting to audition. Would that be correct?
Not really.
Not
it would
yet?
be later.
Okay.
It would be later. I was doing this as a hobby into my later 20s, and
Because I know you did some graphic design for a local newspaper at one point.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. That became my day job, because when I was at that theater company in college, we would have to design our own flyers, and we would post them all around campus. And I picked up some design skills and ended up kind of falling into print design. And so I did that for many years, and then eventually just got laid off of a job that I had for a long time. And I think I broke up out of a long-term relationship almost simultaneously, and I just kind of felt like, oh gosh, I have nothing to lose. Why not just go for it, now? So that was kind of the start of when I started really pursuing this dream of mine.
Well, your pursuance was on two fronts, because what's interesting that I'm sure a lot of people don't know about you is that, you co-wrote with Frank Lin American Fusion.
Oh, yeah,
which became a movie in 2005. So
Right.
you had a produced screenwriting credit, and your script American Fusion was good enough that it landed you on the Nichols as a quarterfinalist, to my knowledge, as well.
That's right. That's right. That was right when I decided I was going to start pursuing acting professionally. And
just for any of our listeners that don't know, the Nichols Fellowship is run by the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. So it is one of the most prestigious screenplay writing fellowships out there, because it has involvement with the Academy. Now, you didn't get the final fellowship, but even getting to be a quarterfinalist is a huge deal. So, I just want to, for a second, don't worry, I'm not going to focus on you casting Fabio as Fabio in your first film, which was inspired casting for sure. But what could you tell us was your most important lesson on your first feature film, both writing and taking a role in it?
I co-wrote it with the director,
right.
Franklin, and I acted in it. And, it was just one of those things. I was so used to writing plays in college and post-college. And it was, it just felt like kind of an extension of that, and something that just kind of it was like, one day it was like, hey, you want to write this thing with me? And you could write a role for yourself. I was like, sure. I didn't really think much of it. And my thought was, it's probably not going to get produced, because I kind of knew enough about the business that nothing gets produced, especially when you're early on, when you first start writing. You kind of have to have a bunch of screenplays under your belt before any of them get produced, if that even happens, because it's just such a tough game. Yeah, but we pretty much self-financed, and did it independently, and were able to make it. And it was great fun, and really like really solidified this idea in my head that this was what I wanted to do with my life. I think that was the main takeaway for me from that. That was one of Pat Morita's last roles.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to ask about that.
Yeah,
what was it like working with him, because he's a legend.
It was amazing, because he was one of the probably the first person I saw on anything where I was like, oh my God, that's an Asian person who doesn't have an accent. I think it was on Sanford and Son, because I remember loving Sanford and Son, and he would just show up, and it was just such a great surprise, and then I'd follow him over the years, and obviously Mr. Miyagi. I mean, the guy's legendary, and But on set, all I did was ask him about Red Fox and Sanford and Son and their relationship, because I knew they had a friendship, and I'm such a big Red Fox fan. So it was a great experience. It was a really great experience.
Well, so as you got out there a bit as an actor and started auditioning, what were some of the worst auditions that you remember? Like something that still haunts you to this very day? You don't have to name names, but you could talk about the experience.
I've had so many nightmare auditions, I've never been a great auditioner. One that comes to mind was I was auditioning for this TV pilot and I remember Nathan Lane was in it, was cast as one of the main characters. In my audition, my character like runs up these stairs and delivers this monologue. He's drenched in sweat, and I remember sitting in the waiting room, and I look across the room, and there's this water dispenser, and with these little cups, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'll take some water up with me to the audition and I'll just pour it on my head so it'll look like sweat's drenched down my face. But I'll do it in front of the casting director. It'll be like a show that I'll put on. They call me in. I go upstairs to this tiny office. I mean, literally, the casting director's desk is right in front of me and he's sitting behind the desk. He's like maybe 3 feet away from me. And he's like, you ready? And I'm like, give me 1 second. And I like pour the water down my face. And I open my eyes and I see water on his face. It had like,
oh no,
bounced off of my face onto him. And all I remember is looking down at his desk and seeing the ink on his paper just kind of like expanding into these like these bubbly circles. And I remember he was just staring at me mortified. And I do my scene and he doesn't say anything. And I just quietly walk out.
So you definitely got the role, right?
Oh, yeah, I got the role.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Good advice for young actors. Always dump a glass of water on the casting agent.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about that story is that this guy was a renowned, and still is a renowned casting director. And I thought, I'll never get called into his office again, because that was mortifying, you know. And I'd say about 5 years later, I got called into his office again. And I was like, oh my God, I wonder if he remembers that it was me who did that. And it was for a show, and I did my audition, and I ended up booking the part. Well, and which made me think, as horrible as that was, he probably sees things like that regularly,
Did you ever ask him once you got the part?
No. I didn't want to put that back into his head.
What about nowadays? Like, with so much time in the past and you've gone on to a very successful career, have you ever reconnected? And
no. I'm not bringing that up there.
You're not? Wow. Okay. All these years later. All right. Well, I sincerely hope he's listening. That's all. Well, so that's really cool, and it's cool that you eventually got a role.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lesson in, people often don't remember the things that you do, and you just kind of got to keep moving forward.
Well, I'd seen your film at Sundance, and I met you at the WGA Awards.
That's right.
Obviously, writing is something that's important for you, and you were one of the presenters at the awards this year. I just want to ask: are there other screenplays that you've written or co-written that are unproduced that you still kind of have on a shelf that you'd love to dust off someday?
Oh my God, so many.
Really? That's great.
So many. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to highlight one to tell us about?
It still might be in play, so I don't want to say too much about it, but it was basically a very autobiographical, absurdist comedy about my early years trying to be, entering into this acting world and winding up basically in an underground fight club, fighting to win a role in a movie. It sounds very stupid, and actually,
it sounds great. Does it have a title you want to mention? I mean, I think it's great you're still trying to make it.
It's called The Big Break, and there's like a very eccentric Werner Herzog type of director who's trying to cast this role, and his way of deciding between his final 2 actors is to pit them up against each other in this underground fight club. It's very stupid.
I think it sounds amazing. So I hope you do get it made. A lot of people know you as an actor, and I think this is a good place to talk about the fact that we're in the middle of a SAG-AFTRA and WGA strike right now.
Yeah.
And I know that you're in the DGA. You got in the DGA for directing an episode of Fresh Off the Boat, which we'll get to in a second. But you had gotten your SAG card. So I just want to talk about kind of the strike and what it all means to you. Do you remember what you got your SAG card for? I'm sure you do.
I got my SAG card. Well, I did extra work I did extra work really early on. And this was before I even decided to pursue acting professionally. I just needed work. I was interested in entertainment because I was doing it as a hobby, throughout my early adulthood. I just wanted to see what it was like on a set. And I remember just doing extra work, eventually like getting enough SAG vouchers to join the union. That was over the course of years,
Yeah.
and I just kind of sat on those SAG vouchers without ever actively considering paying. I never paid my dues because I didn't think I was going to do it professionally. And then several years later, I decided, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And I have the voucher, so I'm going to start paying my dues. And that's what I did. And I've been in the union ever since.
How did joining the union change your life? I mean, for a lot of people, it adds a level of stability that's much needed.
Yeah. I mean, when you're first starting out, that's the goal. You just want to be a part of this union because it just brings you a sense of legitimacy, a sense of being taken care of, and being a part of a very special organization, a very esteemed group. And I was and still am extremely proud to be a part of the union.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that we're starting out with extra work, because one of the things that's come up as a reason why SAG has gone on strike is that some companies have wanted to take full scans of extras, pay them a 1-day labor rate, and then use scans of them in other movies, ad infinitum, which is not fair and, totally one of the reasons to go on strike.
So many sacrifices are being made. Even our movie, it's like none of the actors are promoting, our writer isn't promoting, but I feel like it's worth it because now more than any time is the time to take care of these things, because I think the technology is moving so fast and we just can't afford to wait until the next cycle to, figure these things out. We have to do it now, particularly with AI, but on top of all of the other really important things we're fighting for.
The concept of saying that it's new technology and they can't derive a proper residual structure or business model. I mean, back in the 2007 writer's strike, they were still saying that DVD technology was a new technology. And, that had been around since the mid-90s.
That's right.
It's always something that unless you put your foot down and stop it, it'll just keep going until you do. And for the record, for our listeners, Randall had gotten permission from SAG to be here and discuss the film and his career because, he's directing this movie. So yes, you have a cameo in the movie. I've seen it. You have a good cameo for yourself, but it wasn't a role significant enough to be considered a lead. So
that's right. Yeah, I had to do my due. Yeah, I did my due diligence. I checked in with the union, made sure that it would be okay, and they gave me their blessings.
And that's fantastic. Well, so is there anything else you want to add about your strike experience? Have you been out on any of the lines?
Yeah, I've been out on the lines, and it has been very inspiring and, oddly joyful on the lines. And I think that's a good thing. We're not only fighting, we're kind of celebrating each other and celebrating this union and the fact that we got each other's backs. And the cool thing is, because I've been working at this career for so long, there's just like so many writers and actors and people that I've met and worked with, and people I haven't seen in a long time who I've been bumping into on the lines. And it's been very, I don't know, just very heartening.
That's awesome. Well, back to your career for a minute, and I swear we're going to get to today's film. I promise you we will. I just have a few more questions. It was life-changing for you to get cast in Fresh Off the Boat, which had a 5-season run, and you eventually directed an episode as well.
Yeah.
I guess just starting there, because again, that's what got you into the DGA, which is not on strike currently, but you're making Shortcomings, your directorial debut.
Yeah.
You're perfectly suited to be a director who works well with actors because you have such a vast experience in your past on so many different types of shows and productions. What were some of the things that were important to you creatively in your toolbox when you were directing that episode that helped you get through it?
Well, I think that one of the great advantages of being an actor who becomes a director, particularly on a long running show, is that you get to work with so many different directors. Different directors come in every week, and some of them come back repeatedly, and sometimes they'll bring you in on other projects that they've worked on, and then you'll work with more directors. So you really get to kind of glean all the things that work for you, and the things that you can see for yourself are very effective. So I picked up a lot. And, by nature, I was always thinking I would direct more. And, it's what I did in college at the theater company. It's what I did early on, directing shorts and web stuff and eventually some TV. So the whole experience, it felt very natural, not natural. I mean, there were things to learn, obviously, but I was surprised by how comfortable I was in the position. And I think it's because I had picked up so much and I was so interested in it. And I'd listened to podcasts like yours and just was constantly learning.
Do you remember a big challenge in that first step into your directing shoes, or did it go pretty smoothly?
It went pretty smoothly. It went pretty smoothly. And I think in part because I knew everyone. I got along with everyone in production and post-production on that show. Everyone was so helpful. So I was lucky in that I was very well taken care of and very well guided in that initial experience directing. And I was forewarned of all the challenges, inherent challenges of directing a TV show. So I felt pretty comfortable, and it was a lot of fun.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm a fan of your MCU work. Agent Jimmy Woo is the man, and you had the great experience of being on WandaVision, which so many people love, aside from the movies as well, the Ant-Man movies. But what was maybe your favorite moment on WandaVision? What was something that was just really cool for you because it became such a cultural touch point?
I mean, really working with that cast and crew was just so, everyone was so excited to be on something so different. And this was early on, so we didn't know how this would be received, but we all did feel like this was a very weird show, And so like there was kind of this like just real giddiness at being a part of something that was just so unusual, and I think in the back of my head, I thought that it would be it was Marvel, sure, but I still thought it would kind of be a niche, small little thing, And also, nothing had come out on the platform at that point. So we had no idea how many people it would reach, despite being Marvel. But yeah, there was just this real excitement at knowing we were doing something special, regardless of how it would turn out.
That's fantastic. All right, we've talked long enough about your past. I want to get to the present. I was at the Eccles Theater showing in Sundance this year for Shortcomings, and you mentioned before the screening that you could still remember being here in Los Angeles at Giant Robot Comics over on Sawtell and discovering Adrian Tomine's Shortcomings. Yeah. And, I don't know if you discovered it when it was a graphic novel or if it when it was serialized in his series called Optic Nerve, which he wrote. Tell us about when you discovered it and how it stayed with you over the years to the point that you realized it was something you wanted to be involved with cinematically.
Yeah, I discovered the graphic novel. I mean, the book came out in 2007, and that's when I discovered it. I was walking around that store, that tiny store on Sawtell Boulevard, and I saw the cover, and I was something about the cover and his style of art really like kind of attracted me. And I remember opening the book and just reading the whole thing in the store and feeling just so completely immersed by his storytelling, the characters, the settings.
Wait, you read the whole comic in the store?
The whole comic in the store. And I bought the book, took it home, read it again. I think the thing that kind of attracted me most to it was just how real it felt to me. And it felt real to me in part because I was around the same age of these characters at the time. And it felt like such an accurate reflection of my own life with me and my friends, just the things we talk about, the places we'd hang out, types of conversations we were having. It just felt so authentic in that way. And I was pretty blown away at the time by, how people say they feel seen by something. I think this was like the most I had ever felt seen by something after reading this book. And it just kind of stuck with me throughout the years.
You're a produced screenwriter. Did you ever consider writing it or co-writing it with Adrian? Or tell us about how kind of you got the rights and it years later moved forward as a film.
Yeah, well, initially, back in 2007, when I first read the book, I was fairly new in my acting journey. And my initial thought was, oh, I would love to play Ben. What a great
Sure.
role for an actor. Back in the theater company that we started in college and post college, it was like these were the types of roles we got to play, But once I started auditioning and pursuing this professional acting career, I never saw roles like this. It was, nothing had such depth and complexity. I never saw characters that looked like me that were so flawed, and it just felt like a dream role. But then over the years, as I continue on my journey, I eventually aged out of the role, but I still thought about the story. I still wondered about, why isn't anyone making anything of this? And I came to find out that Adrian had written a script, and he wrote the script not long after he wrote the book.
Oh, wow.
Feature script, and he tried, and there was interest in it, but at the time he was told by some executives that it was uncastable, is what they said.
Really?
Yeah, because it was a different time. They just couldn't justify financing a movie with these flawed Asian American characters.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so the thought was maybe we can change the characters.
Really, change the characters into white folks?
That's the assumption that And thankfully, Adrian, this story, means a lot to him. It's a deeply personal project for him. So he didn't give in to any of those thoughts. But the screenplay just kind of sat there for many years. And, a few years back, eventually I had built my acting career into something where, I was able to start a production company. And I asked my producing partner, Hugh, what's going on with Shortcomings? Can we look into this? And he's like, yeah, let me look into it. Came to find out that the script existed, that it was with a production company and they were meeting with directors. And my immediate thought was, oh, I have to throw my hat in the ring. Mind you, I had been obsessed with this book for the past 15 years and almost had been visualizing it as a movie for that long. And so I came up with a very detailed, what I like to think of as a very thoughtful pitch, and I got the job.
Let's decode that for a second. Two things I want to talk about. One is, I am sorry that I don't know when this was published, but there's something that's always stuck with me. I swear to you it was in the early 00s, but it would not surprise me if it was like in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. In which there was a report on Asian Americans in film and television, and it said that there are more aliens from outer space given representation than Asian Americans, and it's been a long-standing problem. I feel like with time it's continued to get better, and people have opened their eyes a bit more about it, and there's more opportunities. What do you think of the current landscape as things have seemingly opened up?
Yeah, a lot of change has happened, particularly in, the past, 5 years or so. It's definitely a different time from when that study was published. But, there's still, like you say, there's still challenges. There's still things that are difficult. I mean, getting Shortcomings financed was a very difficult thing.
I want to hear about that in a second. Yeah, but I mean, would you say that Fresh Off the Boat probably opened the doors for Shortcomings? Because, 5 seasons, it didn't lose money. Ads were sold.
Yeah,
like
6
seasons. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Ads were sold. And people watched it, and that maybe told the powers that be that they've been underestimating who their audiences really are.
I think Fresh Off the Boat certainly was a part of the puzzle. I think Crazy Rich Asians definitely a part of the puzzle. Every kind of success. I mean, you could even take it further back to I don't know, Joy Luck Club.
Sure.
Then Better Luck Tomorrow, these things that kind of hit the zeitgeist. But I think early on, those things were always seen as kind of anomalies. I think with the success of Fresh Off the Boat and of the more recent successes, I think it's become clear that these projects featuring Asian American folks are not just appreciated by Asian Americans. I think that was always the thing that I would hear, is that there wasn't an audience for these things outside of the community, and the community is not that big. I would always think that that's crazy. People just want to see human stories,
Exactly.
And I think we've proven that these stories, when done well, they're appreciated by everybody.
Any story. I mean, because like even earlier this summer, I went and saw Joyride in theaters.
Yeah.
And it was a nearly packed house, and everybody loved it, and it had a very diverse crowd.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's just kind of it's been a stupid long path to
yeah.
say things like that, and it's kind of, I guess it worked out in your favor that Adrian's script wasn't a go, back in 2007, because all these years
Yeah,
later you've
yeah.
been able to direct it. But tell us about that meeting. Put us in the room of what kind of preparation you did and what was you think important a part of your pitch. Because again, like you walking into a room, you're an esteemed actor. You
Yeah.
have, I'm going to cite it wrong, I'm sure, but I think about 172 credits on
Huh.
IMDb. And, you just only have one TV network credit. So I
Yeah.
could see you walking into the room, them
Um,
saying, we love you as an actor, but I don't know if we're going to take you as a director. So you did have to do some convincing. Tell us,
yeah.
put us in that
Yeah.
room. Tell us about your pitch.
I think a big part of my pitch that really sold them on me and Adrian on me was how much the book meant to me and how familiar I was with the book. What struck me most about his work was how real and authentic again it felt to me, and it was that sense of authenticity and realness that was what I wanted to convey. And I wanted whoever were to watch the movie to have the same feeling I had when I first read the graphic novel. I kind of really connected it to that early experience of sitting in that tiny giant robot store and reading this book and really feeling all the feelings, like just laughing and feeling very kind of sad and angry even, and but ultimately feeling very alive and maybe even a touch hopeful. All of those things was what I was aiming for. And for me, the North Star was always that realness. I wanted all of these characters to feel like real people and not one dimensional. And I wanted the places to feel real, and I wanted to really reflect these cities as they are right now, just constantly going back to that sense of real kind of depth and humanity. And I think that ultimately that was the thing that I think got me the job.
You definitely captured it, and we'll get into more details about the film
Yeah.
soon. But you said it a second ago, nothing is easy to finance these days.
Yeah.
And this hasn't been easy to finance for a long time.
Yeah.
Once you came onto the project, it's great to have your name attached. And, did you start attaching some talent, or did you go to try and find a budget first? What was that process like?
Well, what we did first was we worked on the script. We just kind of further developed the script for a couple years.
What year did you come on?
Might have been 3 years ago, 2020, or it was all done on Zoom. So it was definitely during the pandemic, later 2020. Yeah, we just worked on the script, figured out ways to kind of modernize it, just flesh out the characters a little more, and turn it into, make it a movie. And so working with Adrian on that, and eventually we got it to a point where we were ready to send it out to studios and financiers, and it was one no after another, and it felt like, oh gosh, I don't know if we're going to be able to make this, But eventually, a company called Topic understood what we were going for. They were inspired by what we had worked on and came in. Another company called Tango came in with and got us all the financing we need. And then we were ready to go. And because I had an acting obligation, we had a very short window to make the movie. So we pretty much dove into pre-production pretty quickly. And everything from that point on up until Sunday, everything moved very quickly.
Obviously, pitching this around, yes, it's based on a graphic novel, but it's non-superhero. Ben's just a normal guy, and well, abnormal maybe. And Ghost World is the touchstone that people always point back to for a kind of graphic novel about angst and relationships and stuff like that. So even it being a graphic novel, I would assume only got you so far in your pitches.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were a lot of things going against us, I think. The fact that it was a graphic novel, a very important graphic novel in the Asian American community for sure, but not necessarily a, worldwide phenomenon, but a beloved artist, a beloved book. But it's about, again, these Asian American characters hanging out in diners, talking about their feelings. It didn't have a lot of those kind of classic tropes that you'd find in portrayals of Asian Americans generally in cinema. It was really just relationships and walking on sidewalks. So I think for a lot of people, it was a tough sell. And I get it. I totally get it. But I really love those kinds of movies. I could see it. and we all could see it, but I think it was a tough thing for other people to see. But eventually, thankfully we got the team.
I mean, it has a hangout feel. You know,
Yeah.
you could cite like the indies of the 90s, like Slacker or Clerks or like stuff like that.
Totally.
Just a great hangout feel that you don't always get to see in movies that are more plot driven than character driven. But this one cooks. I do want to get to spoilers, but just I guess two last questions before we do.
Sure.
You having a theater background and as an actor, when you put on your director hat, how important is rehearsal to you for a film? Because sometimes budget precludes rehearsal from happening the way some directors want it. Other directors and even actors sometimes don't care about rehearsal. So what are your viewpoints, both as an actor and as a director, specifically, obviously, on this?
It was important to at least get a little bit of rehearsal for me, but it was more important for me to actually just talk about the characters with these actors and to make sure that we were on the same page, you know, regarding these characters, but also like the tone I was going for and just like little nuances that were important to me. But also to learn from the actors, what, you know, why they connected with these characters and what was important to them. So you're right. With our budget, we didn't have a lot of time for rehearsal. So we probably had a few days during production to rehearse. But these actors, Justin Min and Sherry Cola and Ali Maki, they were so excited to be a part of this movie and to be able to play these characters. Going back to what I had said earlier about, you know, these kinds of roles, they don't come to us that often. So they were really excited to dig in. So even off the clock, we met, we'd have dinner, we'd talk on the phone. We were constantly talking about these characters. So in lieu of actual like lengthy rehearsals, we did feel like we all were on the same page by the time we got to production.
That makes sense. What was your budget and schedule? That's our last non-spoiler question.
About $6 million. And this was during COVID, mind you. Yeah. So that takes a big chunk out. And we shot, I believe, if I remember correctly, 24 days in New York and 2 days in the Bay.
Well, actually, you know, just because you mentioned it, right. Were you shooting it during lockdowns? I mean, I think your production was 2021. Is that right?
2022. I believe.
Okay, it was 2022. Got it.
Yeah.
So lockdowns were over, but what
lockdowns were over? Yeah.
What kind of COVID mitigations did you need to use? Because obviously, you know, people kind of look at Hollywood as one of the last places still having measures in place. Yeah. But they forget that, exactly as you just said, when you have 26 days to make a movie, you can't afford for half your crew to be wiped out, or your actors, or individuals getting knocked out for 5 to 10 days at a time. So it's why Hollywood has continued, and I'm glad that they are, taking precautions to make sure that everybody on set is safe and that production could also move forward. So what kind of things, you know, for your first feature film, do you remember being important to keep things rolling during COVID?
Well, at that point, we were far from lockdowns, but and productions were going. We still had to do regular testing for everybody. We ended up with a lot of cases of COVID, you know, particularly in our crew. We lost our DP for a bit, Santiago Gonzalez, who was amazing. By the way, he got it and was out for part of a week, and that was very challenging. And you know, the whole time we were like, if we lose one of our main actors, screwed. We're screwed because we don't have the money to add days. There was really no option for us at that point if we were to have lost one of our actors. So thankfully, they were all very safe, and we somehow got through it. But we did have a lot of people dropping out.
Interesting.
Throughout production. Yeah.
Did you end up needing to have people masked? Was that something that helped solve things? I would think.
Yep. Okay. We were masked during the outdoor stuff. It wasn't. We weren't doing masks. Although, you know, whoever felt more comfortable with masks for sure were wearing masks. But in a lot of those tight indoor spaces, we were all masked. And definitely when people started contracting COVID, you know, we all masked up.
All right. Well, we're going to get into our spoiler section. So, folks, if you have not yet seen Shortcomings, please press pause. Go see it. It's in theaters. Sony Picture Classics picked it up. So like it's in theaters. You could see it. And then come back because we're going to talk in depth about the movie itself. And the one last thing that I will say before we fully get into our spoiler section, because we haven't had a chance to discuss it, Ben is a character that anybody that listens to this podcast will both love and hate because he is a Criterion watching film snob, mostly in all the good ways, with some of the funniest lines possible, because I mean, I saw it at Sundance, so every single one of the inside baseball jokes everybody in the audience got, but you don't have to be inside baseball to understand the jokes that Ben is making. You just have to have a love of cinema and hopefully of Criterion editions. And you'll also love to hate him because he is a snob, and that's okay, because that's part of his story. So keep that in mind in your decision to go see Shortcomings. It's got a lot of really good, well thought out film geekery. So keep that in mind as well. All right. So now as we get into the spoilers, everybody's been warned. You were talking about developing it with Adrian and modernizing it. I mean, you have some great jokes in there. First and foremost, it's just weird that, like, you know, of all the time that you were spending thinking about this project, you have a hilarious Christopher Nolan joke in there, and your movie's opening 3 weeks after, 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after Oppenheimer. So it's like,
I know, isn't that wild? And there's a Margot Robbie
joke.
reference.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy.
And none of that, we didn't think of any of that.
No.
You know, like,
and now it's going to seem like, oh, you're so, you know, contemporary, but those were jokes way back. But actually, I want to start with the beginning of the movie, because obviously Crazy Rich Asians did not exist as a movie when Adrian wrote this. And your film starts off with kind of a parody of it, and basically getting into the theme of the movie, which is identity, because Ben really has to pick a lane, and he's in many lanes, and that's okay for him to be. But he's very anti this Crazy Rich Asians type of movie. And I think it's an interesting place to start. It immediately gets audiences invested because the movie itself was such a success. They know exactly what you're parodying. Tell us about kind of finding that as your starting point.
Well, that happened during the development phase with Adrian and I. You know, that was really a matter of modernizing the, you know, what was there before, but also, again, going back to that North Star of keeping it very authentic and real. I mean, this is a conversation that very much exists in the community when it comes to Crazy Rich Asians, and one that we've all heard. That, you know, some people they just don't want to feel like they have to like something because of the community, you know, and it felt like a very much a way to immediately introduce us to Ben and the kind of person he is, the kind of person he represents in the community. And it just felt, again, very authentic, you know.
I mean, it was a funny debate just to see him ragging on it and not approaching it with any sort of precious gloves and saying, oh, it's an accomplishment. I mean, it was a great way to get inside of his head. What was the most important thing that came out of development that maybe didn't make it into the film? Like, it's always fun to hear about left turns. Was there anything that you and Adrian experimented with as a change that didn't make it into the film?
I would say nothing, you know, like, we were so lean, and we were so, you know, by the time we got to production, anything that didn't need to be there or that we felt didn't need to be there was gone, you know. So we had to be lean just because of our budget constraints. So there wasn't anything major, but, you know, there were obviously a lot of things during production that, you know, came up, and we'd have to be nimble and come up with ideas, but nothing major.
What was most important for you as a director in pre-production? Because obviously pre-production, if you get it right, if you line your ducks up in a row, it'll help make you hit that 26-day window, which you don't have a lot of flexibility on. What was really kind of an important part of your learning experience there?
Well, you know, I was very nervous about not feeling like a director, you know.
Imposter syndrome?
Yeah. I very much was nervous about that. So I overly prepared. I mean, I was drawing out storyboards before we even had locations, you know. I was like so prepared because I knew that I had to be so prepared to be able to kind of let go of things. So I had contingencies in my head. I had everything written down. I drew out storyboards. Once we got locations, I changed the storyboards. I had shot lists, just, you know, worked with Santiago on shot lists and made sure we had, you know, everything. And okay, if we're running out of time, these shots will go. But as long as we get those shots, you know, and we'll shoot the wide in this way in case we have to stay in the wide for the whole, you know, scene. But, you know, I mean, like, every contingency, everything was like fully thought out, overly thought out. And then by the time we went into production, I felt very confident, and I also felt very not precious about all the things that we had written down, because I had thought of it and thought of all the options and plan B's, C's, D's even. And there were still a lot of unforeseen circumstances that we had to deal with. But I oddly felt confident because of, all the work I did in pre-production.
How many cameras did you have?
We had two for a good portion.
Is that kind of a way that you feel comfortable working? Did it allow you more flexibility and to get through scenes faster because you then don't have to set up for another turnaround on a character? Was that basically your theory there?
Yeah, from being an actor, particularly in comedies with a lot of improv, I was used to a lot of cross shooting. So I had planned for a lot of things to be cross shot, but we ended up not cross shooting as much as I had planned, for various reasons. But we definitely, at our budget, those two cameras really, really helped.
You walked into my next question as a director, but also with your past as an actor. What was your approach towards improvisation? Because obviously, sometimes it'll really bring some gold, but at the same time, it could be a fishing expedition that you might not always have time for.
I think because of, again, our budget, we didn't have the luxury to really have passes that were just completely off script, but there was a lot of improv. We'd always get takes as written. In my pre-production, I had a lot of alt lines that I had written, and every night before we'd shoot, I would come up with some alternative jokes, but not just that, but also just in case we have to cut down the scene, places to rearrange things, But with that said, there was still room for improv. And, you have someone like Sherry Cola, you're going to have improv.
Yeah.
And so we definitely made room for that. But there were some days where there was just no time for that. So we literally had to move so quickly that we didn't have time.
Ooh, hey, I would like to thank our sponsor, Screencraft, over at screencraft.org. Screencraft has years of experience putting together writers with agents and managers to launch their careers, and it is a great resource featuring lectures and genre-specific screenwriting contests with Oscar-winning writers as judges along with literary agents. So there are plenty of opportunities for aspiring writers over at Screencraft, and I hope you go check them out over at screencraft.org. And folks, as you know, we are in the midst of a WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike. So Backstory Magazine issue number 50 has been paused. But the good news is it's our 11th year, and that means there's 11 years of archives and 49 full issues that our readers and subscribers could go back and reread, including full screenplays in some of our issues, along with some of our favorite articles that we've ever published. Aside from going through our archive, as strange as it sounds, we are continuing to update issue 49, which is our Oscar issue. And yes, that was a while back. It's been a minute, but we're continuing to update it with new articles that we have permission to do during the strike. So look, Backstory Magazine is my passion project. And for the last 11 years, it has been really important to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where the Zooms of all these interviews can be seen if you want to see us talking out loud. So it's really meant a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. And if you want to subscribe now, I'm here to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. Enter it into your cart at Backstory Magazine, and it will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And it'll give you access through the web on a desktop or laptop, or it will also give you access to our iPad app. You get both for the same price. So thanks once again for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with director Randall Park about his feature film debut, Shortcomings. And remember, folks, it's in theaters now, so I hope you mask up and go enjoy it as much as I did. Ben has a very sarcastic view of life, and it's funny. So, it works in that sense. Yeah. But it's in a way that we see him isolating and alienating himself from his friends.
Yeah.
And it makes Ben not only our protagonist, but kind of our antagonist, really an anti-hero as well. And that can be tough sometimes because it's an interesting tightrope to walk in which you want the audience to keep watching your movie. You don't want to make your protagonist so unlikable that they lose interest. What were some of the things that maybe you and Adrian discussed, or you and the actors, about keeping him likable, but at the same time keeping that sharp edge that originally attracted you to the work? Because if you go too far in either direction, it doesn't work. You hit the perfect balance. I loved what you did.
Jeff. Thank you, man. That was probably one of the biggest challenges going into this entire project, was casting Ben and finding someone who could be all those things about Ben that are obvious, being extremely opinionated, being very prickly and sarcastic, at times angry, but finding an actor where you could really see or feel that this comes from a place of real vulnerability and heartache and sadness, while at the same time, those other things about Ben, he is funny. He's charming. He's a very loyal friend. There are a lot of great things about him, but he's a very complicated character. And we needed somebody who could really convey that humanity about him, despite all those things that we hate about him. So we saw a lot of actors. A lot of them were my friends because I've been in this acting world, and we saw so many actors, so many great actors, but Justin H. Min was the one for us. And he really brought this real depth to the character that was really important for us. And, there's still going to be people who are going to be turned off by Ben, and we knew that going in. But the hope was that people could identify with him more, or at least know somebody like him, in their lives, so that they could sit through a movie and enjoy it despite this character.
I mean, in this genre, kind of, it's a hybrid, but obviously the relationship part of it, the antagonist would traditionally be the person that's replacing Ben. So you would think that it might be Leon, Timothy Simons, who's
he's so great.
Absolutely hilarious in this movie, but he's not. And the funniest thing about him is he's such a good guy. You can't hate him no matter how anybody tries. And so just tell us about that, because you're having an antagonist of sorts in which he can't make sense of it. He can't compete with him because Leon's the man. But it's an interesting setup, and it's another unexpected turn that totally works and keeps things fresh.
Well, Tim Simons is an old friend of mine, and because we were shooting in New York, and because of the budget we were at, we were only able to hire out of New York. Tim lives in LA. I didn't think he was an option, but eventually, I found out from Tim that he would just so happen to be in New York while we were going to be in production. So I, sent him the script. I was like, Tim, would you please do me a solid? And he was excited to, and he came and played, and he was just so amazing, and definitely did a lot of improv. You got to let Tim Simons improv. He's just such a lovable guy. It just made total sense for him to play this character. I really love what you're saying about Ben also being the antagonist. And, I really think this is a movie about personal growth. And I think for Ben, it's like, he is the hero and he's also the villain. And I think, that's what we all are in a way, in our lives. And the question is, will he change? As everything around him is changing, as these people are changing, moving on, and he's left with only himself, will he finally grow a little? I don't really make it clear whether he does or not. I think the thought is that he might.
We're hopeful.
Yeah.
I think he's been his own worst enemy long enough that he's ready to depart from that for a little.
I think so.
Yeah, the only other thing about Sundance that was funny was Tim sat right in front of me. I ended up in the film cast and crew section. I actually know him here in LA. We've chatted here and there. He's so tall. I just leaned forward and I'm like, sir, would you remove your hat because you're very tall? And he just looked at me like I was a crazy person until he realized it was me. And it was very funny. And it was just,
that's awesome.
Until I walked in, because I love walking into movies, not knowing anything about them, to just get a fresh take. I don't even read the synopsis. I didn't even know he was in the movie until he sat down in front of me. And he was fantastic.
God. He's so great.
One of the things that was really interesting is theaters and independent film in general went through such a tough time, really even leading up to the pandemic, but especially during lockdowns and everything.
Yeah.
And theaters are in trouble. That again, it's sad to see that the theater that Ben's working for is having so much trouble.
Yeah.
And it again, during the strike now, knowing that some of these smaller theaters are going to be hurt when movies are being moved to 2024 already.
Yeah,
they're being taken off the schedule. Now, so far, it's been bigger movies. Like I think Dune 2 is moved, and something else just did the other day. But again, puts a weird place for the smaller theaters.
Yeah,
and I thought it was interesting that you kept that message in there. Was that an important part of the original comic? Because in the film, it works as an excuse of, yeah, of course he could go to New York. He doesn't have a job anymore.
It was in the original comic, but I think it didn't go into the financial woes as much as we do in the movie. I mean,
Yeah.
this theater really is struggling, and it is a part of Ben. This is who Ben is. He is this theater, and this theater is kind of on its last legs. Even structurally, it's like falling apart, and a lot of that has to do with it just felt right for the story, and it felt right for reality. It's kind of sadly what's happening now. But in a lot of ways, that theater represents Ben. It represents his kind of dashed filmmaking dreams. It represents him trying to hold on to this version of himself.
That's one of the things that was really accessible about it, though. One of the reasons I really loved it, because, I mean, again, I know that I'm tainted by seeing it at Sundance. I fully admit that, because you're in a crowd of cinephiles. But it's something that everybody's feeling, especially during the strike right now, in which we know that there's shifting grounds in the industry.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that we like that we want to hold on to.
Yeah.
And although people are going less to independent theaters, people don't want to see independent theaters disappear. And so the angst that he was feeling for that, especially for cinephiles, like it was extremely relatable, but also amplified yet again during just like the shifting landscape with things with the strike. That was fascinating to me. You use titles. Was that always going to be a part of it? You had titles kind of separating for chapters, like flaws, ongoing charades, structurally unsound, personal hell, etc. Was that always a part of it?
Well, it was something that I had always thought in the back of my head as a possibility for us, because, again, I was so influenced by Francis Ha and these Woody Allen films that use these titles. And it was something that felt like, in a lot of ways, this movie felt like different chapters, and it just felt like a good way to kind of move the story and also remind the audience of what Ben's going through in his journey at this time.
I thought it worked really well. Sometimes it could be a crutch, but in this case, like it was good to have chapters, but we weren't like waiting for the next chapter title to drop.
Yeah.
So you kept it fresh, in which they were dropping sometimes when you don't expect a chapter to be over.
Yeah. We were very conscious of the timing of the chapters as well. And we really wanted it to, reflect Ben's state of mind, each thing, and to kind of provide some character insight that was additive in a way. So we were very kind of precious about how we approach those.
Editing is the last stage of storytelling. Tell us about your editing process. I'm curious what scenes were cut, and if there was anything maybe that you realized was modular that you could shift from later to earlier or vice versa.
We didn't cut too much. I mean, again, we were so lean, we didn't really have the luxury of cutting too much, but there were really two short sequences that we cut. One of them was this sequence that I loved. It was all a oneer, the whole scene, just one take, moving camera as they're both talking to each other in the apartment. This is in the Bay before she leaves to New York, and they're talking to each other. They're having a conversation, but neither of them are actually talking to each other. They're just kind of talking to themselves with each other. And it ends with them kind of going from the kitchen to the dining table, them sitting on both sides of the dining table in silence. And in the window behind Miko, all in this oneer, just out of pure luck, this ambulance pulled up and it stopped right at the window. And you see these flashing lights, and it's so beautiful and so just poetic and perfect to what's going on in this relationship. It was a scene that I just loved. And I was like, oh, this really makes me look like a good filmmaker, this shot. But we just didn't need it. It just wasn't necessary. Didn't have to be there, the scene. So we ended up cutting it, unfortunately.
Was there anything else that you left on the floor that people might see as like a deleted scene one day?
The other one is a scene that's actually in the graphic novel where Sasha arrives to the apartment to surprise Ben, and Ben immediately thinks they're going to have sex. And he's just like immediately starts making out with her, tossing her bag, taking her bag and tossing it. And then it falls on the ground and all of the contents spill out. And she's like, oh, and he feels really bad because he just like threw all her stuff all over the floor. And it was a very awkward scene that signaled like that they weren't necessarily on the same page. This was kind of preceding their breakup, just one of those moments showing that, okay, these two are happy with each other, but they're not completely in the same rhythm. Again, it was a great funny scene and a really sad scene, actually, and a pathetic scene, but it just, again, we just didn't need it, so it was one of those where if it doesn't add anything, we'll just let go of it. And that was the other one we let go of.
For editing, I thought that the pacing was really, really well done.
Oh, thanks.
And it's tough though, because again, as I said earlier, this is a character driven movie
Yeah.
rather than plot driven. Like,
Yeah.
yes, things happen, but I think you're so invested in the characters that even if the things are on the scale of minutia, it's still okay. What did you learn about storytelling in that capacity? Because I find that character driven always works better than plot driven, because plot driven sometimes becomes by the numbers. And if people aren't personally invested in the characters, it doesn't matter how complicated your plot is. They get bored.
Yeah. Going into the movie, my initial thought regarding editing was to be very minimal and to let things breathe and to have a lot of negative space. I had all of these thoughts going in that I felt like would be really right for this movie. And working with a great editor named Rob Nassau, and he had worked on movies like The Big Sick. We just found that upping the pace and cutting out some of that dead space, it still felt like you were sitting in these moments,
Yeah, even I was going to say that was not your movie.
Yeah. It still felt like we were sitting in these moments. It still felt very immersive. There was a pace to it, but we weren't sacrificing much by cutting out like spaces here and there and keeping the story moving forward and ending scenes in the middle of a line, cutting out of a scene in the middle of an exchange and jumping into scenes, a little later than one would,
I think that's because subconsciously the concept before you have your footage of negative space and wanting longer scenes and opening it up like a bottle of wine, right? And just sitting with it. It's what you desire as like a connoisseur of art. But once you're in it, you realize that since the actors are there and that you're in scenes, you don't need to slow it down and that it's okay to keep a regular pace without that dead space. I mean, by the way, I love Tarkovsky movies, okay? Like,
yeah.
But I have to be in the mood for a Tarkovsky movie.
Totally.
I'm not gonna do it every night. So I think you hit a really good pace, but I could totally see how you went into it with that attitude.
Yeah.
And then I'm just glad that you had the footage that you were able to change it in editing, because I thought the pacing really kept on point.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it was the Ben in me that really wanted to punish the audience a little bit and have them kind of sit through these scenes, a little longer. We got into a good groove and we felt like, okay, this is the right rhythm for the movie.
It's so funny because when you think about a shot where, something's happening visually and you want to let it unfold. And I understand why Sony Classic Movies did this. They took that moment and put it in your trailer that happens towards the end of the movie. Ben is totally down on his luck. He's sitting there in a chair in a food court or wherever.
Yeah.
And this cute girl comes over and talks to him. And when I was watching the movie, I'm like, okay, some cliches you just can't get rid of. Like, now that he's lost everything, here's the new girl. It makes sense. I forgive them. And she just says, like, are you using that chair? And no, she says, is anybody sitting there? And like, again, cliche. And then he's like, no. And like, you think like, oh, something's going to happen. And she just takes it away to her family at the other table. And I was so glad that you didn't do that. But that was like a great moment where things open up. It wasn't too long, and it was like a great laugh with a
That's right.
audience.
Yeah. That's right. That was the moment where we sit in it a little longer, and definitely the rom-com influence. Some people describe the movie as a rom-com, which is kind of baffling to me, but but there is a lot of kind of rom-com elements that we play with, including that scene and Ben running through the streets. There's a lot of things we take from rom-coms and kind of flip them.
Well, and it was good to turn that on its head as well, like that trope. But here's the $1 million question, and you could take a moment before answering it if you want. And there's no right or wrong answer, because only you know in your mind. What would Ben think of Shortcomings? Would he like it or would he diss on it?
That's a good question. Wow. No one's asked me that question.
I've been wanting to ask you since Sundance.
I think he would think it would be a touch too commercial. And I don't think it's that commercial.
But overall, you agree that he would like it? Because I think he would like it, to be honest.
I think overall he would like it, but I think he would be very upset that at the very end, Ben smiles a little bit. I think he would not like that. That would piss him off.
So he'd maybe take the movie, pirate it, do a fan edit, and just cut out that moment.
Yeah.
That's his super cut.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what was your toughest scene as a director? What was the one that you really sweated about, and how did you rise to the creative challenge?
Really, it wasn't one that I was anticipating to be the toughest scene, but it was the scene in the lobby of the Crazy Rich Asian screening when they're all in the lobby. And the reason why it was the toughest was because we shot that in Queens, I believe, and there was a thunderstorm that day. And the thunderstorm delayed us for 3 hours. And we had a lot of stuff to shoot that day. It was a lot of stuff. And we were ending the day on this scene in the lobby where that's when we had all these extras. It had to be night because there were all these very tall windows and you see the window and it's clearly night. There's just a movie screening and they're coming out. And up until that point, we were making our days on purpose. The first AD, Jake Martin, made the schedule easy for me early on, just so I could ease into it and not be too stressed out early on. And then we get hit with this day where we're so behind and, we went so late into the night just for that fairly simple scene,
Yeah.
But
it had a lot of people in it, so I could see it logistically being tough.
A lot of people, yeah. A lot of people. Right before that, that's when we shot the scene immediately after the Crazy Rich Asians where Ben and Miko are sitting in the audience and they're watching, and that was a lot of people too. So it was kind of this very hectic day that was delayed 3 hours. And again, we only had that location for that night. We could not come back. We did not have the luxury of being able to push anything. So we had very few takes. Some of them might have been only one take, because we were running so late. And that was probably the most stressful day, even though the scene itself wasn't that complicated. The scene that I was anticipating to be the most stressful is the big fight scene in Leon's apartment. And that scene was actually fairly easy because the actors were so locked in, they were so locked in and it was all performance, and it was just a matter of capturing their performance. I don't think I did any directing of the actors during that scene. I just let them loose and they were amazing. First take, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible.
It was a really funny scene. What do you wish you knew at the beginning that you had learned by the end, if there was anything?
I would say that post-production is a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. As much as preparation as you can do for production, you can only do so much for post-production. I mean, once you're in post-production, it's kind of a new game. You're almost rewriting, the movie. Not only that, but there's a lot of voices coming in to give their opinions. It becomes particularly for me who, I like to be collaborative and it's always like the best idea wins. But I also would always have to remind myself to maintain my vision and how I originally saw this and, don't overthink things.
I guess without naming names, were there any scenes that you really found yourself having to defend to keep in more than you had anticipated? Was it something like that? If it was a scene in particular, I'd love to hear which one.
I mean, there were definitely scenes where people weren't sure if we needed it, but I wouldn't say they were adamant that they were like, you got to cut that scene out. I can't think of a particular scene that became a point of contention, but definitely tonally, there was a lot of talks about tone.
Were there talks about trying to make Ben appear nicer rather than
There were. Here's a scene. The scene when he's in the car driving Miko to the airport and a car cuts him off and he just snaps. That scene was one that people wanted out because they thought it made Ben too despicable. I love that scene.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I think it's really funny. I think that scene is really about Miko, and the way Ali plays it is just so subtle and beautiful. And Justin is so funny in that scene. And it goes right to him being alone in the apartment, feeling very lonely. To me, you just needed that scene to get him into the next scene where he's sitting by himself and he calls Alice just because he's lonely. And Alice is too busy with another woman and hangs up on him. And he's just by himself, and I felt like you needed that scene. And it was an important transition, but some people thought it was too harsh. Some moviegoers will think it's too harsh, but to me, it was important side of Ben.
Look, kids, road rage is real. Just don't be a part of it. Just say no to road rage. Don't be a part of it. But it's funny, on a second viewing, it's also kind of, if you're focusing on her, it's like, oh yeah, she's probably pretty excited to be going to an airport, to be getting away from him for a little while.
Yeah.
And taking that break. That scene definitely serves as a bit of foreshadowing there.
That's right.
So after the strike ends, is there anything that you had your eye on? Any names of a project or any log lines you want to tell us about that once the strike ends and and writing and production and all that stuff can resume that you want to tell us about?
I mean, there's several projects, through my production company that, once the strike ends, I'll get back to writing and developing. And one of those could definitely end up being the next thing I direct. But, whatever I direct next, I have to be just as passionate about the story, if not more so than I was about Shortcomings, because filmmaking, particularly independent filmmaking, it's so challenging. And the one thing that kind of kept me going was how much I loved the story and these characters. So I would have to feel the same way going into my next one.
Well, Randall, thank you so much for your time. I love your film. I can't wait to see what you do next. I hope everyone goes out and sees Shortcomings. Thanks for hanging out and chatting today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great talking to you, Jeff.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to Randall Park for being so generous with his time in coming down to speak about his directorial debut, Shortcomings. And remember, folks, it's in theaters, so mask up. Go see it, and I know you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Of course, I want to thank our sponsor, Screencraft, over at screencraft.org, and I hope you go check them out. Screencraft has tons of great resources and genre-specific contests, and you can find it all over at screencraft.org. So it's the place to go for an aspiring writer. Check out screencraft.org today. And of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. Now, folks, as you know, issue 50 is delayed due to the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike, and we just want to wait until we could do the proper interviews with the folks that we love and admire, but no one's really doing interviews right now, so that's kind of hard to do. Yet at the same time, the mandate of Backstory is storytellers. That's who we interview. So for our Emmy 2023 sections, we actually are continuing to update our issue 49. We're interviewing directors who are not on strike, along with cinematographers and editors. So we're actually continuing to publish new content during the strike per all the proper rules and provisions, and you could find it all being uploaded directly into issue 49, which is also our Oscar issue, so it's a little zany and wacky to be opening that up all this time later, but that's where you'll find these great new articles. So I hope our readers and subscribers remember to open up the app or visit our website and read the new great stuff that we're publishing. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading the free issue at backstory.net or via our iPad app. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could become a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I'm here to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. Folks, your support has meant everything to me over these past 11 years, and I know that issue 50 is going to be awesome once the strike is over. So truly, to all my listeners in iTunes and Spotify and my watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where these podcast interviews can be seen as Zooms, it really means a lot to me to have your support. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2023. All rights reserved. If you want to drop me a line, you could write into backstoryletters@gmail.com, and I do my best to answer those emails. You could also find me on social media over as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter, or now as it's called X, I guess, and also Backstory_magazine on Twitter or X. You could also use those same handles over on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith on Instagram, or Backstory_mag on Instagram are two other ways to find me as well. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.